In the annals of history, few names resonate with the weight of a nation's birth quite like George Washington. A figure etched into the very soul of America, he was more than a general, more than a president. He was the bedrock upon which a fragile experiment in democracy was built. Yet to understand why Washington towers above his peers, Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, we must journey beyond the myths. We must unravel the man behind the legend. A leader forged not by destiny, but by adversity, principle, and an uncanny ability to surrender power when others clung to it. This is the story of why George Washington stands alone among the Founding Fathers. Born in 1732 to a modest Virginia planter family, George Washington's path to greatness was anything but certain. His father's death at age 11 left him with little inheritance, and his formal education ended at 15. Yet, even as a teenager, Washington hungered for distinction. By 16, he was working as a land surveyor, trekking through the untamed wilderness of the Ohio Valley. This rugged apprenticeship taught him survival, diplomacy with native tribes, and the value of precision, skills that would later define his military and political career. But ambition came with humbling lessons. At 22, as a lieutenant colonel in the British Army during the French and Indian War, Washington's inexperience led to disaster. In 1754, his rash attack on a French scouting party at Jumonville Glen sparked an international crisis. A year later, he was embroiled in the catastrophic Battle of Fort Necessity, where his forces surrendered after a rain-soaked siege. These failures could have ended his career, but instead they became his crucible. Washington learned the cost of arrogance, the importance of strategy over bravado, and the power of reputation. His 1753 expedition into the Ohio Valley, chronicled in his journal, became an accidental bestseller. Colonists devoured its tales of hardship and heroism, casting Washington as a frontier legend. By 1759, he had married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow whose fortune elevated him to Virginia's elite. Yet, unlike many Southern aristocrats, Washington's ambition was never purely self-serving. He yearned for respect, yes, but also for a cause greater than himself. By 1775, that cause found him. Washington had retired to Mount Vernon, content as a tobacco planter. But as Britain's grip on the colonies tightened, his quiet life unraveled. The Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts, Lexington and Concord, each crisis pulled him closer to the storm. When the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia, Washington arrived wearing his old military uniform. A silent statement. He was ready to fight. His peers saw in him what the moment demanded. The revolution needed a leader who could unite fractious colonies, a Southern aristocrat to balance New England's radical fervor. Washington was no firebrand. He spoke sparingly, his authority rooted in restraint. Yet when Congress appointed him commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, he accepted with characteristic humility. I beg it may be remembered that I this day declare, I do not think myself equal to the command. Can you imagine a man of such stature doubting himself? That was Washington. The war that followed tested every fiber of his resolve. His army was underfunded, undersupplied, and outmatched. At the Battle of Brooklyn in 1776, British forces nearly crushed the revolution in its infancy. Washington's daring nighttime evacuation across the East River saved 9,000 men, a retreat he framed as divine providence. But divine favor alone couldn't sustain an army. By December 1777, 11,000 soldiers staggered into Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Here, in the bitter cold, Washington faced his darkest hour. Over 2,000 men perished from starvation and disease. Can you feel the weight of that? Yet, amid despair, he forged discipline. With the help of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian drill master, he transformed ragged volunteers into a professional army. When spring came, they emerged stronger, a testament to Washington's unyielding leadership. But his greatest triumph was not on the battlefield. No, it came in 1783, as the war drew to a close. At Newburgh, New York, simmering resentment over unpaid wages pushed officers to the brink of mutiny. Some urged Washington to seize power, to crown himself king, King George Washington. Unthinkable. Instead, he confronted the conspirators with a masterstroke of theater. Donning spectacles to read a letter, he remarked, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." The room fell silent. His officers wept. fragile as it was, would endure. With the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781, Washington's legend was sealed. Yet, what he did next stunned the world. In December 1783, he stood before Congress in Annapolis and surrendered his sword, resigning as commander-in-chief. To a Europe steeped in monarchy, this voluntary relinquishment of power was unthinkable. King George III reportedly declared, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." But Washington's work was far from done. The Articles of Confederation, the young nation's first constitution, proved disastrously weak. By 1787, states bickered over taxes, trade, and territory. The Union teetered on collapse. Once again, Washington answered the call. He presided over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and his mere presence lent the proceedings weight and dignity. Delegates trusted him to mediate between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, between North and South. The Constitution they crafted was imperfect, a mosaic of compromises. Yet Washington's quiet leadership ensured its ratification. When the Electoral College unanimously elected him as the first president in 1789, he accepted not with triumph, but dread. "My movements to the chair of government will be accompanied by feelings not unlike those of a culprit going to his execution," he confided. Can you imagine that? The first leader of a free republic, dreading the burden of power. His presidency set the template for the republic. He declined the title, His Highness, insisting simply on Mr. President. He established the cabinet, balancing rivals like Jefferson and Hamilton to foster real, rigorous debate. He enforced federal authority during the Whiskey Rebellion, proving the government could quell dissent without tyranny. And in 1796, after 2 terms, he walked away, rejecting calls to rule for life. Who does that? In an age of men hungry for crowns, he laid his down. His farewell address, a 6,000-word warning etched into the nation's conscience, cautioned against political factions and foreign alliances. It was a final act of service, a plea to preserve the Union he'd sacrificed decades to build. Yet, to venerate Washington without scrutiny is to betray his legacy. He was a man of contradictions, a revolutionary who enslaved over 300 people, a liberator who upheld bondage. Though he privately denounced slavery as a species of a servitude which is repugnant to humanity, he deferred its abolition, fearing it would fracture the fragile nation. Only in death did he fully confront this moral failing. His will mandated that his slaves be freed after Martha's passing, a gesture both progressive and incomplete. For Washington, like the nation he built, justice was a work in progress. His death in 1799 sparked an outpouring of grief. "Mourn, O America," proclaimed newspapers. Yet in eulogizing him, we risk obscuring his humanity. He was not a demigod, but a man, flawed, conflicted, yet unwavering in his belief that power should serve principle, not ambition. In the tapestry of history, George Washington's threads are woven with paradox, warrior and peacemaker, slaveholder and emancipator, leader and servant. But it is precisely these contradictions that make him indispensable. In an age of revolutions hijacked by tyrants, he chose surrender over supremacy. In a world of kings, he crowned a nation. Jefferson had brilliance, Hamilton had vision, Adams had integrity. But Washington? He possessed the rarest virtue of all, the wisdom to know that true greatness lies not in seizing power, but in giving it up. That is why, among the founding fathers, he stands first. And that is why, centuries later, his legacy remains not just a monument, but a mirror. A mirror reflecting the ideals we strive to uphold, and the burdens we must still bear.